right, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving. We're going to do a couple of lectures, or I'm going to be doing a few lectures for you while you're on your break. So this first one is on multi-casualty incidents, MCI, or also we call it MPMPs in some places, or something to the extent where there's a lot of patients and it's not a lot of caregivers. And so the main things to keep in mind during this is that when EMS gets overwhelmed, and we'll talk EMS particularly in this case, and then we can work up. EMS particularly will need to stay patient-centered in major MCIs. They could be other things like earthquakes and in shootings, and there'll be an aspect of PD, there'll be an aspect of firefighting and emergency mitigation, and there will be a portion of it on patient care. So our EMT or EMS role is patient care, and that can be basically three different things. It's either initial triage, secondary triage and treatment, or third, it would be transporting. So we do triage, treatment, and transport. And there are many different facets to that. And I will say, going forward, when we do our MCI drill, things are going to get chaotic and things are going to get missed. And the best thing you can do is just smile at the chaos and focus on the small BLS stuff that we are meant to do to move the emergency to the end. Just keep moving your patients from the triage area to your treatment. Make sure that you've gotten a good assessment on them, and then transport them off scene. And make sure that we do this in as coordinated a fashion as possible. All right, without saying anything else, let's jump into the actual lecture here. Hang on one second. Hope everybody's enjoying themselves. I know I am. Okay, good. So here we go. And just kidding. All right, this is mass casualty incidents. It's funny because we also say multi-casualty and the ICS system. I'm going to first brush on the ICS portion, meaning the initiation of ICS, incident command, when it really became a priority for us in the US, and then how we fit into this larger block. And I will say, before we get started, ICS and all of these different incident command system courses that you can take with FEMA and NIMS, I highly suggest you start taking those courses now, so that one, you get a good idea of what ICS entails. Two, it will look great on your resume to have 2 or 3 ICS courses already taken. And then three, every officer and promotion that you go on from here on out, ICS becomes more and more of a factor. Definitely, as a firefighter, you need to know what you're doing and your roles in that little pocket of ICS. As you become an officer, you need to know where you fit as a lieutenant and as a captain, and finally as a chief, and then maybe as an IC as a chief, and where this fits into multi-jurisdictional situations where chiefs fire departments are talking to chiefs of police departments, are talking to CEOs of PG&E or something, where everybody's interacting. You need to know efficiently how you manage these scenes. All right.
Firefighters. The 2 blasts happened in a warehouse storing chemical goods. Julia Kim reports.
It's 11:30 on Wednesday night in Tianjin. The residents taking this video are watching an explosion and fire in the city's port, when suddenly
that's the second blast.
A second, even bigger blast. Estimated to be the equivalent of 21 tons of TNT. Shockwaves rocked the city, shattering windows 2 kilometers away. Witnesses likened it to the end of the world.
好强的气浪，崩死了！那种的成分。
Blinding plumes of smoke still engulfed Tianjin when morning came. In the daylight, the extent of the devastation in the city of 15 million became clear.
他说：“快跑！”
After the second blast, my colleague called to us to come out and run. Then we rushed out together and found out that everything had already been torn down by the shock waves from the blast.
全都已经冲倒了。
As shocked locals come to terms with the scale of the disaster, hospitals are overwhelmed with hundreds of casualties. According to state media, authorities are questioning the managers of the shipping company where the blasts took place. And President Xi Jinping has promised that those responsible will be brought to justice.
Oh, you don't want to be the person on the premier of China's hit list. So a mass casualty incident is technically any incident that depletes the available on-scene resources at any given time, meaning the available emergency caregivers. That really depends on how many people are there and how many patients are there. And it kind of can vary depending on severity of the scene, what the logistical hazards are. But if you were to put a number on it, it's basically when there are 6 or more patients. Once that happens, all of our traditional patient assessments and treatments go out the window. And we go into what's called an MCI. We do start triage, and we manage patients first as a broad, followed by we narrowing it down as we get from station to station. So in some cases, it's man-made. It could be motorcycle vehicle or motor vehicle collisions. It could be fires in apartment complexes. There could be assaults, gang fights, explosions. You know, it could be, this is the Oklahoma City bombing. It could also be natural disasters. It could also be terrorist attacks. We have to keep in mind these things are kind of ramping up, especially in the US, and we need to be ready for these things. This really got started after 9/11, and it was developed. The National Incident Management System really came into its relevance at that point. A lot of agencies across the US realized that should an emergency happen like 9/11 in their town, they were not versed on the way of rolling out emergency care providers, of interacting with neighboring towns and cities, of the idea of contacting somebody to fly in resources. A lot of this had never been discussed prior to 9/11. And so as this became more of a relevant question to ask, National Incident Management System, or NIMS, started to develop these programs to explain to firefighters all the way up to city officials, up to the President of the United States, how to prevent, prepare for, and respond to, and most importantly, recover to any major disaster should it occur. So yes, there were always things in certain areas like floods and wildland fires, but really the idea that these emergencies could be picked and chosen by terrorists in an effort to find the weakest part of the city's infrastructure and attack it made a lot of people wary. And so because of that, we started doing kind of a ramping up of training as well as scenario-based stuff. So it improves coordination and cooperation between public and private entities, provides a common standard for incident management. And this idea of ICS applies across all areas of the country and all incidents, according to all hazards and emergencies. You can scale it up and you can level it down. And it's a very cool kind of accordion-like structure that you can make it much more complex. The bigger the emergency, when it expands out, the IC, the incident commander, now can put people under their their command specifically, who then branch out and work with other agencies. And thus those agencies have a little bit more specific control over what's going on. If it's a smaller incident, a fire engine and a chief operate similarly to an ICS system. The chief is an ICS, the incident commander, and the crew are the emergency mitigation team. When this becomes bigger and bigger, we need to figure out how do we fill in and account for all of those procedures when we have 4 or 5 patients or 6 or 7 logistical problems. Okay, across jurisdiction and geographical boundaries can occur, and incidents across jurisdictional and geographic boundaries occur. And so we need to be able to communicate with people in our nearby areas, and things as simple as being on the right channel frequency can really screw things up. So we have to be able to figure out all of this prior to an incident occurring. How do we do this? What are the ways to roll it out? And are we sure that the people that are coming in to help us are trained as well? And so there's yearly cross-agency training, typically like Urban Shield. This is a picture of us in the Bay Area. We will usually run some kind of scenario, either a mass shooting or a terrorist organization takes over a ferry in the San Francisco Bay, or there's a fire or an earthquake. And all of the agencies within the Marin County area, within the Bay Area, come and operate together and try and show everybody what they have, their bells and whistles, what they like doing, what they can do. And it's more of an educational training than a sit down and book and in PowerPoint. It's very fun. Most of the time, if there's ever any emergency or Urban Shield event in this area, the local EMT programs are contacted so that the students can work as patients or onlookers or something. So it's really fun. And if you ever get a chance to go out and do that, they'll moulage you up and put broken bones in your shin and knock you out and, give you a whole story, and you can kind of play along with it and see how the caregivers do with you. It's really fun. And on top of that, you're learning. It's a really great thing for people just starting in the business to get an idea of what these things look like. So there's a span of control. And in that span of control, the IC is at the head. This IC needs to have a few people under them if this operation becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. Usually the IC can do all of these steps. They're managing the situation. They're taking care of the operation. They're planning the attack, or they're allowing the crews on scene to plan the attack. They're thinking about, as a fire goes longer, well, all right, are we going to need food for these crews? That kind of thing. And then if we are, let's contact let's get somebody over here who's got the money from the kitty, and we can get burritos. When you start talking about a campaign fire that is lasting days to weeks, we're going to need to find all of these things in gross form, in major amounts. And so the incident commander can break down these needs into 4 different individuals, or what we call C flop. The commander is C, F is finance, L is logistics, O is operations, and P is planning. And let's take a large incident like an earthquake. We are going to have the IC creating 4 different branches in order for them to manage these 4 major logistical problems. So here you can see the incident commander at the head in this algorithm. There's a public information officer underneath that agency, so the incident commander can focus on these 4 aspects. The IC further delineates other needs to these 3 people: a public information officer who will talk to news crews and give formal updates. There's a liaison officer who's going to operate between flop and the IC and relay the relevant information in a prioritized manner to the IC. Most emergent issue gets first conversation to the IC as overseen by the liaison officer. And of course, kind of independently running is the safety officer, who's always assessing if there are any issues on scene that will pose life-threatening hazards. And if so, they have autonomy to go directly into CFLOP and take care of those things before someone's injured. So as you break these down, you can imagine that each OP, L, and F, you can have 3 crews operating in each of those. And we break it down in order to make sure that we're only taking care of the necessary amount of people. Your span of control is between 3 and 7. So we'll get to that. So the IC runs the entire incident. They're responsible for coordinating the many activities that occur. And they have underneath them the logistics, the liaison, logistics operations planning, and what's the other one? Logistics. Finance. Finance, duh. Okay. All right. So the IC has those people underneath their command. Then we have this the term singular command. This refers to the IC having complete coordination of the incident. There's one single individual at any time that's in charge of the incident. That individual can be switched out. That IC position can be switched out as the incident continues and people get worn down. But at all times, there should be one person only that the rest of the crews report to. And with that in mind, you can have the crews down at the bottom only reporting to one person, and that person reports only to one supervisor, and that all the way up to the IC is what provides accountability and a little bit more simplistic understanding. Okay. There's also a unified command, and this is when you have, let's say it is an earthquake, and you know there are many factors we have to concern ourselves with: fires, multi-patient casualties, crime, there's electrical needs, there's, you know, the electricity's out, there's gas. So we're going to need to bring in PD and PG&E, and of course the government, the state and city government need to be there to oversee how this is going, because, you know, this is where those individuals are supposed to be earning their keep, is by successfully managing natural disasters and major multi-casualty, multi-jurisdictional emergencies. This has already been decided upon, by the way. There will be an MCI book in every department that has all of the information that periodically gets updated as to which person is the contact person for each agency. And when someone steps down or retires or moves on, excuse me, they put the new person in. And so anytime that call comes in to the mayor on the red phone at 3 a.m., they know exactly who they're calling. And as I mentioned before, span of control is the number of people or tasks that a single individual can monitor. And this actually goes back to, from what I've heard, Alexander the Great. This is like tribal thinking, that in a group or in a platoon or in a number of soldiers or firefighters, less than 3 people that are there to operate are better operating as a group, as a pair, going out, or independently working and doing specific tasks, But once there are three, now they should be governed by one individual at the top. And that person should oversee no more than 7 people at any time. After 7, there's too many people that need to be directed and report to you. So after 7, you should break those groups up so that now you have 2 groups with one person at the head of command overseeing in their span of control 3 to 7 people and so forth. And so anytime it exceeds 7, you break that apart like it's a stock option, and you now have multiple crews, but they're all following the same principle, that the people in each crew only report to one person, and that those 2 people that are at the top of that are only reporting to one person, either in finance, logistics, operations, or planning, and all the way up. All right, finance is responsible for documenting all expenditures and incidents for reimbursement. Finance is the one you want to talk to if you're on a strike team, because they are the ones you turn in your time cards to. They're the ones that ensure that you get your pay at the end of everything. So as an EMT or as a firefighter, most people say, don't worry about anybody else but your IC, your command captain, and finance. Everybody else will manage it, but make sure you get paid. So we have someone basically paying out using the budget and using whatever resources, monetary resources that they have at their disposal. They're also keeping track for eventual reimbursement of all the people there, all of the funds that were used up, and kind of balancing the budget. Logistics, meanwhile, is communicating to finance and the IC and is explaining, here's what we're going to need. We're going to need this type of equipment. We're going to need to house these firefighters after their shift is over in a hotel or in a campground or something. And when we do that, we're going to need them to have tents. We're going to need them to have some kind of per diem. We're going to need food and water, or fuel and lighting, some kind of medical equipment for supplies. And this goes for on the fire ground as well as back in staging. You need to make sure that logistically you have all of the necessities to fight the fires and to rehab the firefighters. And eventually, what are going to be the cleanup concerns? Logistics will look into that. Then you have down on the actual fire ground, or where the rubber meets the road, operations. They're responsible for managing all the tactical things that are happening at the moment, responding to the needs and desires of the crews that are on the fire ground, and seeing what needs to happen next to mitigate this as fast as possible. So this is this person. And operations is overseeing the crews that are at the moment working, and then is reporting what they need to the IC, and or perhaps they are told then to speak to the liaison officer, and the liaison officer is going to go speak to the other 4 branches to planning or logistics or finance, just to make sure that these needs from the fire ground are being properly and efficiently mitigated, taken care of. And then finally, with the operations working with planning, they're trying to decide, so this is where the fire is going. This is what we're using right now to fight the fire. In the near future, in 24 to 96 hours, what are we going to do with what we know is going on now to put a stop to this quicker? So planning is anticipating, based on the information they're getting from operations, how they can use that info, the crews, and the way that the operations are effective or ineffective. They take all that in and factor in, how are we going to now operationally manage this call? So they're planning on future operations, and all these things kind of fold back into each other. Well, we'd like to have planes if it's going up the hill, as our crews aren't going to get there in time. So if planning says we need planes, so then logistics says, I can help you with that. Let me call for that. And then you know, you work in finance is saying then like, okay, so we're going to have to hire in Cal-fired planes. That's going to cost so-and-so kind of this amount of money. And we move on from there. All right. And then from that, there is like, this is kind of like the presidential cabinet. There's a command staff with a safety officer, as I said, who kind of independently floats around and makes sure that everything is safe and that we're not overlooking some major hazards. The PIO, who's talking to the media, and the liaison officer, who's relaying the information from FLOP to IC and is making sure that all communications are effective. Now, that is the idea of ICS, and that gets deeper and deeper the more you get into this field. There we go. And okay. Especially if you go fire, and I suppose if you go politics, and so, you know, you're going that way, you'll have to think of these other portions of ICS. Really, anytime there's a captain or lieutenant's test, there's a little bit more on ICS. And so the sooner you learn it, I think the better off you're going to be. A lot of people dislike it because it's kind of dry, you know, technical talk. A lot of people take to it like a duck in water. They think it's really interesting and everything folds out nice and neat, and they like that. Maybe mathematically or an engineering mind might really take to ICS. It's an important step to have because in any of those situations, regardless if you're an artist or an engineer, you're going to be involved in an emergency, and you need to make sure that you're accounting for all of those things, all of the people, both the patients and the workers, and making sure that this is all managed effectively. And as I've said, this gets very chaotic very fast, as you will see when we run our scenario on Monday. And so let's focus on particularly the EMS service. What are we doing on these calls? So we will be most of the time in operations, and we will be the EMS branch connected to operations. And our main tasks are triage, treatment, and transportation. And so let's take a call where you have a partial building collapse. You walk into the room, there's some debris on the ground, and everyone's in there screaming. You say, this is the fire department, or this is the EMS crew. If you can hear my voice, stand up and walk out to me. And you get a number of people that walk out to you. There's still a lot of people inside, but you've already started triaging. The people that walk out to you, you could say a few things about them. Number one, they can walk. Number two, they are coherent enough to understand you. And so now they're already at least 2 steps more healthy than those people on scene. There may be some little minor accountabilities or ambiguities to that, but for the most part, these people are doing considerably better than the most. And so we consider them what's called walking wounded, and they get tagged as green. What do I mean by that? Well, we have these lovely triage tags, these beautiful little triage tags here. And we're going to be using these. These are the old ones. Nice and simple. Here's the new one. Good heavens. It is a much more elaborate card these days. The important ones to really keep in mind on all of these would be green, yellow, red, black. These are your first primary triaging colors and severity markers. So the walking wounded are going to be green. And as they walk out, you take this little card and you hang it on their head. You go over and stand outside. And there will be an area outside for green patients. There'll be an area for yellow. There'll be an area for red. And then kind of offset from everybody else will be the black deceased area, because you don't want to demoralize those people that are still alive. More on that later.